My name is Sarah, and I was the only one there when my mother-in-law, Eleanor, drew her last breath. Other hospital rooms were filled with the sounds of supportive families. Ours was steeped in silence. No husband, no friends, no one calling. Not even a flimsy excuse. As the doctor officially noted the time, a nurse gently handed me Eleanor's final letter. Inside, I found names, a key, and a single chilling instruction. The monitor showed a flat line at 2:17 p.m. on a Wednesday. It wasn't a dramatic, piercing beep like you see in films, but a soft, steady hum that seemed to echo into an endless void. I stood there, motionless, my hands still holding Eleanor's, which were growing cold. It struck me then. I was the only living soul in that room. My mother-in-law had just passed, and I was utterly alone. "Mrs. Aston, are you doing okay?" A nurse appeared at the door, a clipboard held to her chest. Her eyes carried that practiced sympathy, the kind that comes from witnessing loss daily, yet never quite becoming immune. I just nodded, my throat too constricted to speak. The hallway beyond her was a stark contrast, buzzing with the ordinary chaos of life. Families embracing, doctors striding purposefully, children with balloons for recovering parents, elderly couples holding hands in the waiting area. And there I was, encased in a bubble of quiet that no one had tried to enter. I called them again. I finally choked out, my voice barely a whisper, embarrassingly small. My husband Mark and his sister Chloe. They said they were coming. The nurse's expression softened with a knowing pity. She'd been on duty for the past 3 days while I kept my vigil. She'd seen me place those calls, leave those voicemails, send those increasingly desperate texts. She'd seen the empty doorway every time I glanced up, hopeful, at the sound of approaching footsteps. "Some people find goodbyes very hard," she offered, a kind attempt at comfort. But we both knew, didn't we? This wasn't about difficulty. This was about a conscious decision not to be present. From the next room, I could hear faint sounds of joy. Someone was going home. The juxtaposition made my isolation feel like a lead weight pressing down on me. I need to call the funeral home," I stammered, fumbling for my phone. 3 missed calls, all from my office. None from Mark or Chloe. "The doctor will handle the initial paperwork," the nurse said softly, gently guiding me towards the chair I'd hardly vacated for 72 hours. "And there's something else. Eleanor left this for you." From her uniform pocket, she produced a sealed envelope, slightly creased at the edges. My name, Sarah, was written on it in Eleanor's unique script, sharp, angular letters that still managed an air of elegance despite her frailty. "She made me promise to give it to you only after she was gone," the nurse clarified. "She was very firm about it." My fingers shook as I took it. In the 3 years I'd been married to Mark, Eleanor had always been civil, but there was a distance. We weren't close, not the kind to share deep secrets. What could she possibly need to tell me now that couldn't have been said while she was alive? I carefully broke the seal and extracted a single sheet of paper. A key, old and slightly tarnished, was taped to the top. Beneath it, an address I didn't recognize and one sentence that sent an icy shiver down my spine. "They never truly valued me. Now, they'll understand what it feels like to be overlooked." "Is everything all right?" the nurse inquired, noticing the change in my expression. "Yes," I lied, quickly folding the paper. "Just some final thoughts." After signing the necessary documents and gathering Eleanor's few personal items, a nightgown, her reading glasses, a well-loved paperback, I walked out of the hospital into a daze. The brightness of the late afternoon sun felt almost offensive. In the parking lot, families were helping patients into cars. Some carried balloons or flowers, others new babies. Normal life, marching on, while mine felt suspended in an alternate reality. I sat in my car for a full 20 minutes before I could summon the will to turn the ignition key. In those moments, I replayed Eleanor's last weeks. Her growing silence, the enigmatic comments I'd dismissed as side effects of her medication, the way she'd sometimes just stare at me when she thought I wasn't looking, as if committing my face to memory. Or perhaps, I realized with a jolt, as if she were making a crucial decision. The drive home was surreal. Traffic lights changed. Pedestrians crossed. The everyday rhythm of the city continued, oblivious to the weight of Eleanor's death and her cryptic message that I now carried. I checked my phone at a stoplight. Still nothing from Mark or Chloe. I was hanging my coat in the hall when my phone finally rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. A turbulent mix of relief and resentment churned within me. "Hey, love," he said, his tone breezy. "You heading home soon? Did you remember to pick up some milk?" We're out of practically everything. The sheer normalcy of his words made me grip the kitchen counter for support. "Eleanor died today," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. The line was silent for a beat. "Oh," he finally managed. "When did that happen?" 7 p.m., I replied, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tears now tracing silent paths down my cheeks. "You would have known if you'd bothered to answer any of my calls." Another pause. "Look, I was swamped with meetings all day. You know how it gets." His voice softened slightly. "Well, she was never an easy woman." I ended the call without another word. The house, our house, suddenly felt suffocatingly empty. On the kitchen table, bills and magazines lay scattered, the detritus of a normal life that now seemed utterly meaningless. And in my hand, Eleanor's note felt like it was burning a hole through my palm. That night, sleep eluded me. Mark came home late, slipped into bed without a word, and was gone before sunrise for an early start. I lay awake until the first hint of dawn. Eleanor's key clutched so tightly in my hand its edges dug into my skin. By 7 a.m., I'd made up my mind. I showered, dressed, and entered the address from Eleanor's note into my car's GPS. It led me about 30 minutes out of the city, down progressively narrower country lanes, until I reached a gravel driveway almost swallowed by overgrown shrubs. A rusted wrought iron gate stood partially ajar, as if in quiet invitation. The cottage beyond was small and weathered, its once white paint peeling to reveal the gray wood beneath. Wild roses had conquered an entire wall, their thorny tendrils scraping against warped window frames. It had the air of a place abandoned, forgotten by the passage of time. The key slid perfectly into the tarnished lock. As I pushed the door inward, it groaned in protest, revealing an interior frozen in a bygone era. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the partially drawn curtains. Bookshelves lined one wall, laden with volumes. Photo albums were neatly stacked on a coffee table. And there, on the kitchen table, placed squarely in the center, was another envelope. To be opened upon my death by my lawyer. I stepped inside, pulling the creaky door shut behind me. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and a faint, lingering trace of lavender. As the dust began to settle around me, I realized I was standing in Eleanor's true sanctuary, not the sterile, impersonal room at the assisted living facility where Mark had insisted she stay. This was where her heart had truly resided, and somehow, for reasons I couldn't yet fathom, she had chosen to share this secret place with me, and only me. I sat at that kitchen table in Eleanor's hidden cottage for what felt like an hour, just staring at the envelope addressed to her lawyer. The dust-coated surfaces around me whispered a story of desertion, not of neglect, but of deliberate, careful preservation. This place had been waiting, just like the envelope in my hand. The name on this second envelope read, Ms. Amelia Davies, attorney at law, with an address downtown. I found the number online and dialed, my heart thudding with each ring. Davies Legal Services, a crisp, professional voice answered. "My name is Sarah Aston," I began, my own voice surprisingly firm. "My mother-in-law, Eleanor Aston, passed away yesterday. She left an envelope addressed to you." A brief pause hung on the line. "Ms. Aston, I've been expecting your call. I'm very sorry for your loss." The formality in her tone softened, becoming more genuine. "Eleanor was a truly remarkable woman. Could you come to my office tomorrow morning? There are matters we need to discuss." "Of course," I agreed. Should I bring the envelope? Please do. And Ms. Aston? Eleanor was very specific about her wishes. She requested that all named beneficiaries be present for the reading of her will. That would include Mark and Chloe Aston. My stomach clenched. They'll need to be there? In person? I'm afraid so. Eleanor was quite insistent on this point. That evening, I returned to our house to find Mark sprawled on the sofa, absorbed in sports highlights. He barely acknowledged my entrance. Where have you been all day? He asked, his eyes still glued to the screen. I stood in the doorway, studying his profile, the same strong jawline as Eleanor's, but utterly lacking her depth of character. I've been handling your mother's affairs, since no one else bothered to show up while she was dying. That finally got his attention. He muted the TV. Don't start with the guilt trip, Sarah. Mom and I had our issues, you know that. Her lawyer called, I continued, ignoring his defensive tone. We need to be at her office tomorrow morning for the reading of the will. You and Chloe. He snorted. What will? Mom had nothing but medical bills. Nevertheless, her lawyer insists we all attend. Ms. Davies said Eleanor was very specific. Mark rolled his eyes but then shrugged. Fine, I'll let Chloe know. The next morning, Mark drove us downtown in a tense, irritated silence. We met Chloe outside the modest brick building that housed Davies Legal Services. She was chain-smoking, her angular face etched with annoyance. This is a complete waste of time, she muttered, grinding out her cigarette with the toe of her shoe. I had to take unpaid leave for this nonsense. We entered the building together, a family unit in name only. Ms. Davies' office was compact but impeccably organized. Walnut furniture, shelves of law books, and a single elegant orchid on the windowsill. The lawyer herself mirrored her surroundings, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with shrewd eyes that seemed to assess us in an instant. Two older women were already seated in the visitor chairs, Grace and Helen, friends of Eleanor's from her church, whom I'd met briefly at holiday gatherings years ago. They nodded politely, but looked as bewildered by their presence as we were. Thank you all for coming, Ms. Davies began once we were settled. As Eleanor's legal representative for the past 15 years, I've been entrusted with executing her final wishes. Mark glanced pointedly at his watch. Chloe tapped her foot, arms crossed defensively. Let's proceed, Ms. Davies continued, slipping on her reading glasses and opening a leather-bound portfolio. This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Grace Aston, revised and notarized 2 months ago. She started reading the formal legal language. Mark and Chloe exchanged bored glances. Grace and Helen sat with respectful attention. I clutched my purse, inside which lay both envelopes Eleanor had left for me. Moving to the distribution of assets, Ms. Davies went on. To my son, Mark Aston. Mark straightened slightly. I leave my forgiveness, though you have not earned it. The room fell silent. Chloe's foot stopped tapping. To my daughter, Chloe Aston, I leave my wedding band, which you once so admired. May it remind you that promises should be honored. Chloe's face flushed a deep crimson. To my dear friends, Grace Mercer and Helen Cartwright, I leave my profound gratitude for the kindness you showed me in my final year, and a sum of $5,000 each. The two women exchanged startled, grateful glances. And to my daughter-in-law, Sarah Aston, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including my primary residence at 47 Willow Lane. All bank accounts, investment portfolios, insurance policies, and personal possessions. The silence shattered. What? Chloe's voice was a sharp crack in the stillness. That's preposterous! Mark leaped to his feet. There has to be some mistake. Sarah barely even knew my mother. Ms. Davies remained perfectly composed. There is no mistake. Eleanor was of sound mind when she made these changes. Changes? Mark demanded. What changes? When your mother revised her will on March 15th of this year, shortly after receiving her terminal diagnosis. Mark whirled towards me, his face contorted with suspicion. You knew about this, didn't you? What did you do? Manipulate her when she was drugged up? Take advantage of her confusion? I had no idea, I whispered, genuinely stunned. Then a memory surfaced. She asked me to drive her to an appointment downtown, in March. She said it was for her medication plan. I waited in the car. I never knew. How convenient, Chloe spat. The devoted daughter-in-law routine paid off perfectly, didn't it? Well, we'll fight this. Mom wasn't in her right mind. Ms. Davies cleared her throat. I anticipated this reaction. Eleanor did as well. She slid a document across the polished table. This is a psychiatric evaluation, performed 1 week before Eleanor changed her will, certifying her mental competency. She also recorded a video statement explaining her decisions, which will be provided to the court if necessary. Mark's face had gone ashen. How much? He asked, his voice hoarse. How much did she leave? Ms. Davies glanced at me. The cottage alone is valued at approximately $300,000. There are investment accounts totaling just over $270,000 and insurance policies worth $150,000. Eleanor lived modestly, but she invested wisely. Grace and Helen were staring at me, their expressions a mixture of surprise and something else. Respect, perhaps? Or maybe vindication. This is legally binding, Ms. Davies continued. My office will handle the transfer of all assets. And now, if you'll excuse us, I need to speak with Mrs. Aston privately. After Mark and Chloe stormed out, followed by the two friends, Ms. Davies handed me a third envelope. Eleanor asked me to give you this after the reading. She said you would understand. Alone in her office, I opened it, my fingers trembling. Inside was a single sheet of Eleanor's distinctive stationery, her precise handwriting forming just one paragraph. Forgive no one, let them beg, let them kneel, and when they do, smile, turn, and walk away. I folded the note carefully, placing it in my purse with the others. When I looked up, Ms. Davies was watching me with quiet understanding. She chose you for a reason, the lawyer said softly, not just as her beneficiary, but as her voice. In that moment, I finally understood. Eleanor hadn't just left me money or property. She'd given me something far more potent, the power she, herself, had never wielded in life. And with it, a mission that would challenge every fiber of my being. Outside, Mark was waiting by the car, his expression a tempest of confusion and barely suppressed rage. Chloe had vanished. As I approached, I felt something shift within me, a new, unfamiliar strength coursing through my veins. Eleanor's voice seemed to whisper in my ear. Now, they'll understand what it feels like to be overlooked. The drive home from Ms. Davies' office was unbearable. Mark's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see a muscle pulsing beneath his skin. Neither of us uttered a word. The silence stretched between us, a palpable entity heavy with unspoken accusations. I'm going to stay at the cottage tonight, I finally said as we pulled into our driveway. I need to sort through some of Eleanor's things. Mark shot me a sideways glance, calculation flickering in his eyes, replacing the raw anger. Take whatever you need. This must be incredibly overwhelming for you. The abrupt shift in his tone made my skin crawl. I gathered an overnight bag without further comment and drove back to Eleanor's secret haven. My haven now, according to the will. The cottage felt different in the gathering dusk. Less abandoned, more expectant. I switched on lamps, swept away cobwebs, and brewed a cup of tea in the kitchen where a fine layer of dust coated every surface. On a shelf near the fireplace, I discovered a row of leather-bound journals spanning decades, each meticulously labeled with a year in Eleanor's precise script. I selected the most recent one and settled into an armchair by the window. Outside, crickets began their nightly serenade as I turned to the first page. Arthur has been gone 7 years today, Eleanor had written. Mark called for the first time in months. He needed money for car repairs. I gave it to him because I'm a fool who still believes a mother's love should be unconditional. Arthur would be furious with me. I read until my eyes ached. Journal after journal revealed a woman I'd never truly known, sharp, observant, and increasingly isolated. Eleanor had documented everything. Mark's escalating financial demands, Chloe's cutting remarks about her embarrassing fashion sense and outdated opinions, friends who gradually drifted away when her illness made socializing too difficult. Called Mark 3 times this week. Read an entry from just 6 months prior. He's screening my calls. When he finally answered, I could hear a football game in the background. He said he was swamped but would visit soon. That was February. It's now June. Most heartbreaking were her descriptions of holidays spent entirely alone. Made a small chicken anyway. Set the table for 4 out of habit, though I knew no one would come. Chloe texted. They're spending Christmas with her boyfriend's family in Aspen. Mark didn't even bother with an excuse this year. I slept fitfully that night, Eleanor's words echoing in my dreams. The next morning, I discovered a wooden chest tucked under the bed in the main bedroom. Inside were bundles of letters, tied with faded ribbon. Correspondence between Eleanor and Arthur spanning their 40-year marriage. One letter, dated just weeks before Arthur's death, struck me with particular force. "My dearest Eleanor," Arthur had written in a shaky hand. "The doctor says I don't have much time, so I need to say what matters. Our children have become strangers to us, not in one dramatic moment, but in 1,000 small betrayals. You'll want to leave them everything, because that's what mothers do. Don't reward those who abandoned us in our hour of need. Remember what we built together, Eleanor. Do what's right, even if it's hard, even if it breaks your heart." I carefully returned the letter to its envelope, understanding now the genesis of Eleanor's final, resolute decision. These weren't the bitter actions of a vindictive old woman. They were the considered choices of someone who had finally, painfully, recognized an undeniable truth. Some ties, even those of blood, aren't worth preserving when they've been stretched beyond all recognition. My phone buzzed. Mark's name on the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Hey," he said, his voice unnaturally cheerful. "Just checking on you. I made your favorite lasagna for dinner if you want to come home." "I'll be staying here another night," I replied. "There's a lot to go through." "No problem," he said smoothly. "I was thinking, why don't we take a weekend trip soon? Just us, like the old days. We could use some time to reconnect after everything that's happened." My stomach churned at his transparent attempt at manipulation. "Maybe," I said noncommittally. "I'll let you know." For the next week, Mark's transformation was both fascinating and repulsive. He called daily with solicitous inquiries about my well-being. He cleaned the house, cooked elaborate meals on the nights I came home, even bought me flowers. The performance was flawless, yet utterly hollow. His eyes remained calculating, constantly watching for any sign that his strategy was succeeding. Then the court summons arrived. "Petition to contest validity of will," the document proclaimed in bold type. Chloe had filed a formal challenge, claiming Eleanor had been of unsound mind and subject to undue influence. The allegations painted me as a manipulative opportunist who had isolated Eleanor and poisoned her against her own family. I called Ms. Davies immediately, my hands shaking. "I expected this," she said calmly. Chloe consulted 3 different attorneys before finding one desperate enough to take her case. "Don't worry." Eleanor anticipated this reaction and prepared extensively. 2 days before the hearing, Ms. Davies invited me to her office to review their strategy. She placed a small digital recorder on her desk. "Eleanor made these recordings during her final months," she explained, "with her full knowledge and consent." She pressed play. Eleanor's voice, thinner than I remembered but clear and articulate, filled the room. "My daughter Chloe visited today for the first time in 8 months. She spent 12 minutes complaining about her job, 20 minutes scrolling through her phone, and left when I mentioned my latest scan results. She asked if she could borrow my mother's diamond earrings. I said no. She called me selfish." Ms. Davies stopped the recording. "There are dozens more like this. Eleanor was documenting their behavior long before she changed her will. Combined with her psychiatric evaluation and her doctor's testimony, Chloe doesn't have a case." The courtroom was small and stuffy. Chloe sat with her attorney, a nervous-looking man with thinning hair who kept shuffling his papers. Mark sat directly behind them, separate but clearly aligned in spirit. When I entered with Ms. Davies, his expression briefly cracked, revealing naked hostility before smoothing back into one of concerned neutrality. The hearing lasted less than an hour. The judge listened impassively as Chloe's attorney presented their flimsy arguments. When it was Ms. Davies' turn, she methodically dismantled each accusation with documentation, medical testimony, and finally, Eleanor's own recorded words. The judge dismissed the challenge, ordering Chloe to pay all court costs. The aftermath was swift and unexpected. The local paper ran a small story about the case. People talked. Chloe's friends began making excuses to cancel plans. The boutique, where she worked part-time, asked her to take some time off until things settled down. Her boyfriend stopped appearing in her social media posts. Mark's carefully constructed facade crumbled that night. When I returned to our house to pack more of my belongings, he was waiting, a half-empty whiskey glass in his hand. "Happy now?" he snarled, all pretense gone. "You've turned my own mother against me, even from beyond the grave." Eleanor did. "That all by herself," I replied quietly. "She just needed someone to witness it." "You think you're so clever," he hissed, stepping closer. "Played the perfect doting daughter-in-law while plotting to steal everything." In that moment, I saw Mark with absolute clarity, not as my husband or even as Eleanor's son, but as the selfish, entitled man both women had eventually, painfully, come to recognize. The revelation wasn't dramatic, it was simply the final piece clicking into place. "I'll be moving to the cottage permanently," I said, stepping around him. "You can keep this house for now. We'll discuss divorce terms through our attorneys." "Divorce?" His face contorted with genuine shock. "You can't be serious, after everything I've done for you?" The question hung in the air between us, so utterly absurd I almost laughed. Instead, I walked upstairs to pack, Eleanor's words from her letter echoing in my mind. "Forgive no one. Let them beg. Let them kneel." The cottage became my sanctuary. During the divorce proceedings, I spent my days sorting through Eleanor's belongings, discovering new facets of her life with each box I opened, each drawer I explored. At night, I slept in her bedroom, oddly comforted by the faded floral wallpaper and the soft, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. 3 weeks after I'd moved out of our shared house, Mark appeared on the cottage doorstep. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a carefully constructed humility that didn't quite reach his eyes. He stood with his hands stuffed in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. "Can we talk?" he asked, trying to peer around me into the cottage. I stepped outside rather than inviting him in, closing the door firmly behind me. Eleanor's space wasn't for him to invade. "The bank called," he said after an awkward silence. "They're questioning some of the business loans without Mom's co-signing power." He trailed off, his gaze fixed on a point just past my shoulder. "And?" I prompted, refusing to make this any easier for him. "I'm in a tight spot, Sarah. Just until things stabilize. $5,000 would cover this month's mortgage and the car payment." I studied his face, the face I'd woken up beside for 3 years, thinking I knew the person behind it. "Your mother left everything to me," I replied evenly. "You left her with nothing." "I'm just following her wishes." His carefully constructed facade cracked. "She's dead. What does it matter to her now? This isn't about Mom anymore. This is about you being vindictive." "No, Mark. This is about consequences. Eleanor saw you clearly in the end. And now, so do I." As he stormed back to his car, I felt no satisfaction, only a quiet certainty that I was honoring Eleanor's final resolute request. Chloe came next. Not in person, but through a frantic, slurred voicemail left at 2 in the morning. "My landlord's threatening eviction," she mumbled, clearly intoxicated. "I lost my job because of that stupid court case. This is all your fault. The least you could do is help me out." I deleted the message without responding. The cottage itself seemed to have opinions about my choices. Each time I refused their entreaties, the ancient floorboards would creak in what felt like steadfast approval. As spring progressed into summer, I began transforming the space, guided by entries from Eleanor's journals. "Always wanted this place to be filled with conversation and laughter," she'd written once. "Arthur and I dreamed of hosting gatherings for our friends, for the community. Then life got in the way and somehow it never happened. I hired local contractors to repair the sagging porch and update the plumbing. I painted walls in warm, welcoming colors and replaced the threadbare carpets with polished hardwood. The final touch was a hand-carved wooden sign above the front door. Eleanor's Haven. Ms. Davies helped me establish a nonprofit foundation with a portion of Eleanor's investments. We opened the doors on what would have been Eleanor's 73rd birthday, offering the community a place for grief support groups, elder companionship programs, and weekly community dinners. Eleanor would have loved this, Grace said, her eyes damp as she toured the renovated space. She'd become a regular visitor during the renovation, sharing stories about Eleanor that painted a vivid picture of the woman before loneliness and illness had dimmed her spirit. She was always the first to organize a meal train when someone was sick, Helen added, adjusting a photograph of Eleanor I'd hung in the entryway. Remember how she taught those cooking classes at the church? She made everyone feel like family, the way. Irony wasn't lost on me. Eleanor had created family connections with virtual strangers while her own children had abandoned her. But through the foundation's work, a new narrative began to emerge. People in town started speaking of Eleanor differently. No longer the reclusive old woman who died alone, but the generous spirit whose legacy was now bringing the community together. 6 months after Eleanor's death, Mark made his most calculated move. He invited me to lunch at our old favorite restaurant, an intimate Italian place where we'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays. He arrived early, securing our usual table by the window. When I sat down, he immediately reached for my hands across the table. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Sarah," he began, his voice low and earnest. "A lot of soul-searching. I wasn't the husband you deserved. I wasn't the son my mother needed." I slipped my hands from his grasp, watching him carefully. "I want us to start over. Renew our vows. Rebuild what we had." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and placed it between us. "I found Mom's engagement ring in her things before everything happened. She would have wanted you to have it." The lie was so blatant, it almost took my breath away. Eleanor's engagement ring was locked securely in my jewelry box at the cottage, one of the few personal items she'd kept with her at the assisted living facility, and which had been returned to me with her effects. "That's not her ring, Mark," I said quietly. His composure faltered for a mere second before he recovered. "Well, it's similar. The point is, I want to make things right. Meet me at Riverside Park this weekend. We can talk about our future." I agreed, more curious than conflicted about what desperate measure he might try next. The park was ablaze with autumn colors when I arrived on Saturday. Mark waited by the stone bridge where he'd proposed 3 years earlier, his theatrical sense of symmetry on full display. He'd even brought champagne and 2 flutes. "You came," he said, unable to hide his surprise and relief. I did. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "I brought something for you as well." His face brightened as he reached for it, doubtless expecting some sign of capitulation. Instead, he found divorce papers, already signed by me. "What is this?" he demanded, though the answer was clearly spelled out on the first page. "Exactly what it looks like. You made your choices long ago, Mark. Now I'm making mine." "You can't do this," he sputtered. "After everything I've done to make things right." "You haven't done anything to make things right," I corrected him. "You've done everything to get your hands on Eleanor's money. There's a difference." He ripped the papers in half, a childish gesture that changed nothing. "My attorney had the originals. This isn't over," he threatened, storming away. But it was. 2 days later, an email arrived from Chloe. Gone was the entitled anger of her earlier communications. In its place was a carefully crafted apology and a heartfelt plea for assistance. "I've hit rock bottom," she wrote. "I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm desperate. Even a small loan would make a difference right now." I considered her words for a long time, remembering Eleanor's final letter. Then I scanned that letter and attached it to my reply. Nothing more, nothing less. Forgive no one. Let them beg, let them kneel. And when they do, smile, turn, and walk away. I blocked her email address immediately afterward. That evening, I walked through Eleanor's haven after everyone had gone home. The main room still held the warm echoes of the day's conversations. Elderly neighbors sharing stories over tea, a young widow finding solace in a support group, children laughing during an after-school program. For the first time since Eleanor's death, I felt a genuine sense of peace wash over me. I wasn't just someone's wife anymore. I wasn't just someone's daughter-in-law. I was a woman standing on her own, carrying forward the legacy of another woman who had been wronged and who had refused to die quietly. I ran my fingers along the spines of Eleanor's journals, now displayed on a special shelf in the community room. I understand now, I whispered to the empty room. This is what you wanted all along. 1 year passed, like turning pages in one of Eleanor's journals. Sometimes slowly, sometimes in a blur of activity, but each day adding to a story that was still being written. Eleanor's haven flourished beyond my wildest expectations. What had begun as a modest community space now buzzed with daily activities: Monday afternoon art classes for seniors, Tuesday evening grief support circles, Wednesday community dinners where strangers became friends over homemade lasagna and apple pie. The cottage that had once stood empty and forgotten now pulsed with life. On the anniversary of Eleanor's passing, we unveiled a mural in the entrance hall. A local artist had worked from photographs I'd found in Eleanor's albums, images of Eleanor and Arthur in their prime, sitting beneath the sprawling oak tree that still stood majestically behind the cottage. In the painting, they were young and vibrant, Eleanor's head thrown back in laughter while Arthur gazed at her with undisguised adoration. It captures them perfectly, Helen remarked during the unveiling ceremony, dabbing at her eyes. That's exactly how they were before. Well, before everything changed. The everything she referred to hung unspoken between us. Arthur's death, the family's abandonment, Eleanor's isolation. But the mural represented something different. Not an ending, but a continuation. Eleanor would have hated all this fuss, Grace said with a watery chuckle, gesturing at the crowd gathered for the unveiling. But secretly she would have loved it too. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. She would have pretended to be embarrassed while memorizing every detail to write about later. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in what had once been Eleanor's bedroom, but now served as my office. The local newspaper had covered the unveiling, and I traced my finger over the headline, Eleanor's Haven marks 1 year of community service. The article mentioned the upcoming senior health fair we were hosting and quoted several program participants about the difference the center had made in their lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Ms. Davies. Eleanor would be proud, not just of the center, but of you. The following week, I received an invitation to speak at a regional conference on elder care and community support. The organizer had visited Eleanor's Haven during an open house and been deeply impressed by our programs. We'd love for you to share your story, she explained over the phone. So many seniors face isolation. Your perspective could be incredibly valuable. Standing at the podium a month later, facing a room full of healthcare professionals, social workers, and community organizers, I felt Eleanor's presence acutely. My mother-in-law died alone, I began, my voice steady despite the emotion constricting my chest. Not because she had no family, but because her family chose not to be there. I shared Eleanor's story, sanitized of the more painful, personal details. Her name changed to protect what little privacy remained, focusing instead on the insidious nature of elder isolation. How it happens not in dramatic moments, but in a series of small betrayals. Missed phone calls, postponed visits, dismissive responses. The community center we've created isn't just about activities or services, I explained. It's about bearing witness to each other's lives. It's about creating spaces where people are truly seen and heard, especially when their biological families fail them. After my speech, a line of people waited to speak with me. Many shared similar stories: parents or grandparents whose children had drifted away, elderly neighbors who went days without speaking to another human being. Have you considered writing a book? One woman asked, pressing her card into my hand. I'm an editor at Meridian Publishing. Your message deserves a wider audience. That night, in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and began typing. The words flowed easily, as though they'd been waiting for permission to emerge. I wrote about Eleanor, about her journals, about the woman I'd come to know only after her death. I wrote about grief, not just for her passing, but for the relationship we might have had if I'd recognized her loneliness sooner. But as the manuscript progressed over the following months, it transformed. The early chapters, steeped in loss and regret, gave way to something unexpected. Hope. I found myself writing about Eleanor's Haven, about the community that had formed within its walls, about the healing that happens when people come together, with purpose. I titled the manuscript, "The Letter That Freed Me," an homage to Eleanor's final communication that had irrevocably changed the course of my life. My editor loved it, calling it a timely and poignant examination of family obligation, elder care, and finding strength in unexpected places. News traveled, as it always does in small towns. I heard through Helen that Mark had moved to Arizona, remarried just 6 months after our divorce was finalized. He'd found work at a car dealership, a significant step down from the business he'd been forced to sell when the loans came due. His new wife was 24, a former receptionist at his old company. "Apparently, they're trying for a baby already," Helen reported during one of our weekly tea sessions. I nodded, feeling nothing but a vague sense of pity for a woman who likely didn't know what she'd signed up for. Chloe's trajectory had been different. According to town gossip, she'd taken a night shift at the 24-hour diner on the highway, serving truckers and insomniacs. Grace had seen her there once, thinner, paler, her customary sharp tongue notably absent. "She looked right through me," Grace said. "Wouldn't even meet my eyes when she brought the coffee." I never responded to these updates, never expressed satisfaction or regret. Eleanor's final instruction, smile, turn, and walk away, had become my mantra. Not out of cruelty or vengeance, but from the quiet certainty that some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. The book was published in spring, coinciding with the 2nd anniversary of Eleanor's Haven. The launch event, held in the center's community room, drew a surprisingly large crowd. As I signed copies and accepted congratulations, I couldn't help but think of how differently things might have gone if Eleanor had been surrounded by even a fraction of this support during her final days. Later that evening, after the caterers had packed up and the last guest had departed, I walked out to the massive oak tree behind the cottage. Its branches stretched toward the darkening sky, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. At its base, I placed a bouquet of wildflowers, the same variety that had grown in Eleanor's garden when she and Arthur first bought this land. "You were never forgotten," I whispered, resting my palm against the rough bark. "And now, neither am I." The breeze picked up, sending petals dancing around my feet. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of completion. The past, with all its pain and betrayal, remained where it belonged, behind me. The future stretched ahead, built not on the shaky foundation of family obligation, but on the solid ground of truth, respect, and quiet strength. Eleanor's final gift hadn't been the money or the property. It had been permission. Permission to define myself on my own terms, to recognize toxic relationships and walk away from them without guilt, to build something meaningful from the ashes of disappointment. As twilight deepened into night, I made my way back to the cottage, to the home that had become both sanctuary and mission. Tomorrow would bring new visitors to Eleanor's Haven, new stories, new connections. The work would continue, evolving in ways even Eleanor couldn't have imagined. And somewhere, I like to think, she was watching, not with bitterness or regret, but with the quiet satisfaction of a woman whose final act of defiance had created ripples of change far beyond her own life. That, I decided, was the true meaning of legacy. Not what you leave behind, but what grows from the seeds you plant. Eleanor had planted seeds of truth in the barren soil of betrayal, and against all odds, something beautiful had blossomed. If this incredible inheritance story had you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. My favorite moment was when Sarah presented Mark with the divorce papers right where he proposed. Pure poetic justice. What was your favorite part? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories about finding strength and turning tables, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss out.